By any standards, Gerry Fitt was an important figure in 20th century Irish history. The occasion of this programme is the publication of 2 books about him, Fighting Fit by Chris Ryder and Gerry Fitt, A Political Chameleon by Michael A. Murphy. This morning, Gerry Fitt, a self-assessment drawn from many interviews he gave throughout his career to RTE. And this is not just about politics.
I suppose maybe it was a war or something. All the sort of ghetto bitterness which I had about being a Catholic, about being a second-class citizen, that all evaporated.
In his childhood, he knew he wouldn't be working in the nearby dockyards.
And we used to sing, if your name is Timothy or Pat, you won't get a job in the shipyard with a fiending name like that.
But he was not then to know that he would end as a politician in the House of Lords.
I don't know whether you've seen the Irish Times report this morning.
Someone rang me to tell me what was in the Irish Times.
David McKittrick said you seemed only mildly embarrassed as you went through. Let me tell you what he said. As you went through the antiquated, almost Masonic-style ritual of kneeling, hat doffing, and bowing and scraping.
Well, I don't know now what bowing and scraping was. I didn't do any scraping.
And the full contexts of those interviews later in the programme. Gerry Fitt was born in Belfast in 1926.
Born on the 9th of April 1926, and Paisley was born on the 6th of April. So the two of us were born in the 1 week. And my mother used to say before she died, the devil was busy that week.
Growing up, he could remember the hungry 1930s.
And one of my very earliest political memories was I was about 8 or 9 years of age. I was coming home from chapel, and there was a fellow giving out leaflets. And why he gave me one, I don't know. And I got it, and I read it, or I thought I could read it, and I couldn't read it very well at that age. But I kept it for years and years after. And it was a quotation from James Connolly. And by the way, it has played a great part in my political thinking. And you may remember this: Ireland, apart from her people, means nothing to me. And the man who is full of love and enthusiasm for Ireland and can yet walk through her streets unmoved and witness all the wrong and suffering, shame and degradation that is wrought upon the people of Ireland, by Irish men and Irishmen, without burning in his heart to end this wrong, is, in my opinion, a shame, a liar and a cheat, no matter how much he may profess to love that combination of chemical elements which he is pleased to call Ireland.
His father died when Gerry Fitt was 9 years old.
His father died with TB, and he had been involved in the labour movement in Ireland. He worked in Gallagher's tobacco factory. Maybe I got it from him, but he died in 1935 when I was very young. And I think there were a lot of old books which he left behind, and I got them.
Gerry Fitt, as you'll hear, remained very interested in books.
I was born on the Antrim Road, and I'd overlooked the Belfast shipyard, and you could see the Belfast shipyard. And even as kids, we were told that the Belfast shipyard was a den of Protestantism or anti-Catholicism. And we used to sing, or skip, well, the wee girls skipped. It was a parody on if you're Irish, come into the parlour. And you know, if they say, if you're Irish, come into the parlour. If your name is Timothy or Pat, as long as you come from Ireland, there's a welcome on the mat. And we used to sing, if your name is Timothy or Pat, you won't get a job in the shipyard with a fiending name like that. So we were youngsters. And all those things, the 12th of July would come, and we would see the 12th of July bands marching by the top of the street, and the police or the B specials would stand at the top of the streets to because there was trouble in the 30s as well, to let these orange parades. And we felt sort of hemmed and caged in. And it was a Catholic ghetto I lived in, New Lodge Road, beside the New Lodge Road. Unconsciously, you never thought about it, but you began to develop a big boulder on your shoulder, a big second-class citizen. I was just like any other wee kid in that area, any wee boy like that. There was a massive unemployment in the area. Lots of people were living on what they then called outdoor relief. And when my father died, there were 6 of us left, 3 boys and 3 girls. My mother had to go out every day, and she had to work as a domestic. And I think she got 2 shillings or half a crown a day. And I used to meet her coming home, and I remember very vividly she used to be very tired. So you felt that you were a second-class citizen there. But then as time went on, when the war began in 39, I was 13 when the war began. When I became 14, I got a job in a barber shop. I got all sorts of jobs as a message boy, etc. And you got 6 shillings a week or 5 shillings a week or something.
His schooling was with the Christian Brothers in Belfast until he left school at 14.
And then I could have gone to what would then have been a grammar school, they called it a secondary school. But like most wee Catholic kids in Northern Ireland, you had to buy your own books. And most wee Catholic kids from large families, the parents were waiting on the oldest one to leave school so that they could go and work and try to help the ones that were younger. So I had in fact got I'd passed the exams, whatever there was, and I could have gone on to secondary school. But I didn't want to go to secondary school. I wanted to go away and get a job and help my mother because my father was dead. And I wanted to go away and help her, and then I wanted to go away to sea. I wasn't particularly concerned about getting a university degree. I got any degrees I got it out of the University of Life.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street.
World War II was to change Gerry Fitt's life. He was 13 when he heard this Neville Chamberlain broadcast in September 1939.
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Although Eamon de Valera talked of neutrality,
it is our duty to Ireland to try to keep out of this war.
the young Gerry Fitt, Belfast Catholic, couldn't wait to get into the war, into the merchant navy.
When I was 15 years and 11 months in 1941, I went away to sea, and I got a job on a ship, believe it or not, as a fireman. And I was under 16 years of age, and I've got my discharge book to prove it. Down in the bows of a ship shuffling coal, and I wasn't very big at 6'50", but the thing about it was my brother-in-law and my brother were the other two firemen, so they did the heavy bits. Right. And then I went to sea. Now, when I went away to sea, when we were living in dock as a kid, we didn't like the Protestants because we knew they didn't like us, or we felt they didn't like us. And we didn't like the English because we felt that they backed up the Protestants and didn't back us. So you had a boulder on. You were against the Protestants and you were against English. And then when I went away to sea during the war, I met my first Englishman. I met my first Scotsman and Welshman, first Norwegian and first Greek. I met lots of people at sea. And I began to think, well, these people are not the baddies that I had envisaged in my mind. You know? And I met Englishmen. There's some good Englishmen, there's some nasty ones. There's some good Scotchmen, and every nationality has got its good and its bad. But being at sea and on ships with them, and being under attack by German aeroplanes and German submarines, we were all in it together. I was on North Atlantic convoys, and I was on Russian convoys as well. And I suppose maybe it was the war or something. All the sort of ghetto bitterness which I had about being a Catholic, about being a second-class citizen, that all evaporated. And then I saw some of the devastation of war. I remember going into Hamburg just after it was liberated, the devastation at the bombing rate. I remember getting into Naples after it was free, just after the Americans had kept their Salerno. So then I went to sea all during the war, and then in 1947, I read a lot, by the way, whatever I could when I was home.
What kind of things were you reading?
Well, on a ship, there was the class system. The cowboy books were all down for the crew, and the biographies were all up with the officers. And I used to argue with them that I wanted to read. I didn't like cowboy books. I don't like cowboy books now, and I don't like cowboy pictures, nor do I like cowboy songs. I don't go in that at all. So I used to argue with different types of books, and whatever biography I got, whatever they had up there, I succeeded in arguing with them about it. And I got it, and I read it. The books were put aboard the ship by the missions to seamen, the apostleship of the sea, and the flying angels. So I read with everything. You had nothing else to do, it seemed. And then, 1947, I got married. I met my wife at Hyde Park Corner on the 23rd of February in 1947. So we got from Castlederg, and I met her there, and we went long in making up our mind to get married. We got married in November of the same year, 47. And then I was still going to sea, and I didn't want to go to sea when I met Anne.
The political bug really caught Gerry Fitt in the Westminster by-election in West Belfast in 1951.
That was when the political bug bit me. It's been with me ever since. I went out working for Jack Beattie, and I got myself a duodenal ulcer out of it. I starved myself to it, and I didn't want anything at all. I just wanted to see Jack Beattie elected. We fought the election like hell. The Unionist had a fella helping them there. He was a Unionist MP in Stormont called Nat Menford, and he had a meeting in an Orange Hall. And at the conclusion of the meeting, he says, "God save the King and to hell with the Pope." And there was not a lot, but there were some decent Unionists didn't like that. And they began to write letters into local newspapers and say, "I am a Unionist, I believe in Ulster, but I don't believe in this sort of nasty sectarianism." And I'm convinced that him making that statement, that it lost him the election. Because the election went on, and it was fought tooth and nail. And after 5 recounts, Jack Beattie won by 25 votes. I remember it was a very emotional time for me. And as soon as he was declared elected, I started to cry. And little did I know that the next time that seat would be won would be 15 years after it, and it would be me.
In the meantime, Gerry Fitt is a member of the Irish Labour Party. In the marginal seat of Dock Ward in Belfast, Gerry Fitt contested the 1958 Stormont election.
And in 58, the parliamentary election in Dock had to be refought. And Murray Morgan, our MP, for all sorts of reasons, which I needn't go into, he didn't fight the election. And we couldn't get a candidate. And we couldn't get what was even worse, we couldn't get the money for the candidate's deposit, which was 150 quid. So I went away and borrowed the 150 quid of a nephew of mine, and I fought the seat in 1958, in March 1958, and it was a hell of a ding-dong election too, because the unionists had all the money and all the cars and all the transport. And the big thing which we can't answer, we'll never be sure, by the way, the mission was on. You know, you have a men's mission and a women's mission and a kid's mission. The men's mission was on that week. And they had to go to it at 7 o'clock at night, and a whole lot of them come home and got their tea and went away down to the mission. And I'm quite certain that didn't do me any favours. But during the afternoon, a friend of mine, I said to him, you know why people like to get driven to the polling stations? They like to travel in cars to the polling stations, even in those days. And I could have hired taxis for 4 quid a day, shows you the value of money then. And I said to him, Billy, we'll borrow 20 quid and we'll hire 5 taxis and they can ferry the people to the polling station. And he said, no, Jerry, he said, if you don't win, he says, where would we get 20 quid to pay back? Shows you 20 quid, where would we get 20 quid? So he talked me out of it. I think he still regrets it. And we didn't get the 20 quid, and I was beaten by 203 votes. And I took that very bad. So 2 months after that, in May of 1958, the council elections were coming up again. And we didn't seem to have much of a chance because the unionists had a majority on the register. But I went away and I borrowed 50 quid. And I got another candidate. And we fought, and I managed to get this other unionist and work him into the field as an independent unionist to split the vote. And he did. And I won by 27 and the other fellow won by 10. That was me, a councillor.
And he also pursued a WEA course in further education.
After I came home from sea, I used to go to workers' educational associations. They were run by the trade union movement. And I used to go there and learn a wee bit about economics. And then there was another thing. It cost 7 quid at the time, and 7 quid was an awful lot of money. The International Correspondence School, they sent you a book, and you read. It was all done by correspondence, and you did, and then you sent them. And I think I had 3 different papers from them, and I passed them all. But by this time I was running a family, and I couldn't afford to give them another 7 quid for the second time. But as I say, I was in the library in Belfast, and I read whatever I could get. I became sort of a terribly interested in economics because I was certainly involved with politics. But I never had any great inkling for a university because I was too busy doing other things. Those 3 years between 1958 and 1961 were the most important years of my political life. Because I was a councillor and you didn't get paid for being a councillor at the time. And I had no money and I was running a small family. But as I say, I was absolutely obsessed with sort of being in politics and being able to help people. And I read all the National Insurance Acts. And I used to go down to the local tribunals representing people. And I became known as the Perry Mason of the local tribunals. In Northern Ireland, Belfast is a series of wee small villages. If you're a Protestant and you live in one part of Belfast, it's almost a certainty you've got a Protestant brother-in-law or son-in-law in the other part of Belfast. And the same thing if you're a Catholic. If you're a Catholic living in the Falls, you have a relative in Dock or a relative in Ardoyne. So, when I got in, I deliberately set out to prove that I wasn't a Catholic representative, that I was a non-sectarian representative. And I remember Protestants coming to my door in 1958, and they would knock the door very timidly, and when I would open it, it was a corporation flat, and they would say, Mr. Fitt, Councillor Fitt, I'm a Protestant. And I would say, look, I don't want to know whether you're Protestant, because I already knew where they lived. They lived in ghettos and all, I knew their address. But those were people, those were Protestant people, and they were living in exactly the same conditions as the Catholics were. And they were having the same problems. There was a massive unemployment around at the time, and there were a whole lot of them on the dole and sickness benefit, and they had the same problems, except that they felt that Northern Ireland was their home or something, and they felt that they owned a bit of it, but the Catholics didn't. But I began to represent them, and my representation from them, or for them, would travel like wildfire all over the place. And the more I helped them, the more they got their relations to come and see me. Took a lot out of me, by the way. And I had to neglect my own home and all the rest. I was going out to these local tribunals and then going to meetings at the city council, etc. But I made a lot of friends that way. A lot of friends in those 3 years, from 58 to 61. And then in 61, I defended the seat, and I won it with a big majority, the council seats. Where prior to that, I didn't even think I could have won it at all. I remember during that 1961 election out in the street, a fella coming up to me in the street, he said, Gerry, he said, I'm an Orange man, he said, but I'm voting for you, he says, and I'm going to tell everybody I know round here, he says, to vote for you. And I said, thank you very much, and by Jesus, they did, you know. 1961. Then in 1962, the parliamentary seat had come up again for re-election, and I went out and fought the parliamentary seat, and I won the parliamentary seat. And that gave me some sort of economic wherewithal to stay in politics. You got 700 quid a year. That's what you got, 700 quid a year, and I thought I was a millionaire. 700 quid a year, but at least it was, I was able to sort of look after my wife and kids. And then in 1965, Terence O'Neill had taken over from Lord Brookborough as the Prime Minister, and he called an election for November 1965, and I was very apprehensive about this election, because the history of Duck up to then had been that no political party had held the seat at successive elections. And here I was the second time round fighting against history. But I went out and I fought like hell. It was very cold weather, it was bad weather, and I fought the election again and won with an even bigger majority.
He well appreciated how undemocratic the whole Stormont system was, since the opposition were without any prospect of power.
In Stormont, you see, there were 52 seats, and the Unionist always held 40 of them, or 38 of them. And the opposition was a very beleaguered opposition, because there was never any possibility that they were going to become the government. So it was undemocratic from that point of view, and it was a permanent one-party state. It was the Unionists were always going to be in control of the state, and there was always going to be a permanent opposition. And in Belfast, the 3 Catholic seats that could be won in Belfast, and there was only 3 that could be won, were Falls, Central and Dock. Dock was the hardest to win because it had a big Protestant clientele as well. Falls and Central had big Catholic majorities, but the one that I had, Dock, you had to depend on a certain minimum of Protestant votes, otherwise you didn't win. So in 1965 I won the election again, and then in 1966 an election took place again for West Belfast. It was 15 years after I had fought for Jack Beattie in 1951. I said that I would fight the seat, and I was advised against it. People told me at that time there were 7,000 of a majority of Protestants on the register. I knew that I had represented Protestants and Catholics, and a whole lot of them lived in the West Belfast area. And I said, I have a feeling that when it comes to a vote, if they'll not vote against me. They may not vote for me, but they'll not vote against me, because they'll remember me either helping them over a style or helping some of their relatives over a style. And sure enough, that's the way the election went. It was a hell of a nasty election, and the Unionists called me an IRA man and all, everything that they could throw at me. But I fought the election, and it was both from the blue. Nobody could have believed it with that majority. I won it, beat them in West Belfast in 1966. It was an absolute, nobody could believe it. even I couldn't believe it. At that time, and I said again, and I said with a great deal of pride and a big lot of regrets, I could do nothing wrong in Northern Ireland. Every election I fought, I was winning. And then in 1968, the civil rights movement began. And I played a reasonably prominent part in it. With Austin Curry and with others, we started off a civil rights movement. And I was concerned about bringing in legislation which would help the underdog living in the Catholic ghettos in Northern Ireland. I wasn't worried too much about Catholic businessmen, because there were always quite a few Catholic businessmen, well-heeled Catholics in Northern Ireland, even in the worst days of Unionism, who were living very well. I was worried about the poor people living in the Catholic ghetto. And we started off the civil rights movement, and then I went to Derry on the 5th of October, the famous Civil Rights March. But I had taken the precaution of bringing Labour MPs over to see what was going to happen, because I knew what was going to happen, that they were going to beat hell out of us. Relative to that debate tonight, I knew they were going to beat hell out of us. And I had got some photographers over as well, and RTE had got Gay Byrne, the photographer, up there as well. So we were marching in a place where the police told us we weren't allowed to march in Derry. And I was the very first one. I was grabbed by the police, and they beat me over the head with a baton. And the blood sort of ran out of me, and run down my face, and the cameras were there to see this. And this caused a great big furore. And when I went back to Westminster, I made speech after speech, and I said, I got this for asking for the same rights for my constituents as you've got for years. Civil rights movement was totally justified, but it scared the life out of the Protestants, because they could see the agitation for civil rights as being in some way an attack on their privileges, which it actually wasn't. And that began the sort of trouble. The Unionist underdog began to rebel against what he saw as concessions being given. And then went on to 1969. There was another election under Terence O'Neill, and I won my seat again in Dublin. 1969, the troubles began in Belfast. And on August the 13th, there were 5 people killed. There was demonstration, and then there was sectarian demonstration. There was 5 people killed on the 13th of August. And there was awful fear in West Belfast. The Catholics, terribly emotional, they thought that they were going to get slaughtered in their bed. And by the way, the Protestants thought they were going to get slaughtered the other way. And I rang up at the behest of a whole lot of Catholics living in West Belfast who were absolutely hysterical. I rang up Jim Callaghan, who was then Home Secretary, and pleaded with him to send the army in, because there was a real fear that a pogrom could have broken out in Northern Ireland. And I remember what Jim Callaghan said to me. He said, Gerry, he said, I can get the army in, but it's going to be the devil of a job to get it out.
It's now often forgotten that it was a civil rights victory to get the British Army into the streets of Belfast and Derry in 1969. Gerry Fitt defended his Westminster seat in the general election of 1970.
I had a very nasty election in West Belfast, because the IRA were coming to the fore, and they were beginning to attack me as being a pro-Brit and all this sort of stuff. And I fought, and I won that election again in West Belfast in 70. Then in 1971, the IRA started shooting. When the IRA started shooting, it changed my whole political life, because I could never understand how the IRA could be guilty of some of the terrible atrocities that they did. You know, one of the big ones, which in fact brought about internment, was 3 young Scottish soldiers, and the IRA met them in a bar. They were off duty, and they met them in a bar downtown in Kelly's in Belfast, and they were all drunk, real drunk. One was only 17, and they took them up to a place called Leganeel and blew their brains out. And I thought that was awful at that time. And then things went on from bad to worse. There were atrocities and bombings and explosions. And then internment came in August 1971. And that just tore the whole community asunder. The Catholic population went absolutely batchy. And then the IRA began to continue that. Now in 1969, John Hume was elected. He defeated the Nationalists, John Hume and Ivan Cooper and Paddy O'Hanlon and Paddy Devlin and all. And they were elected because of the civil rights agitation that was then taking place. But they had no party. At least I had a party based in Belfast. So in 1971 there was great sort of pressure on to form a new political party. And much against my will, with a great deal of reservations, I formed with the rest of them the SDLP. And then we had a party. And then in 1972 was Bloody Sunday.
There was 2 actual sergeants came into the car park. The soldiers got out the first one, ran to the front wheel, and just fired straight away.
He screamed and kind of groaned and fell to the ground, and I thought he'd been hit by a rubber bullet, first of all, and I looked back, and then I heard more shooting, and I just lay flat on the ground. And I looked back over my shoulder, and I saw a woman being run over by a sergeant who was driven straight at her, and I saw blood spurting from this boy's chest out through his shirt. So I crawled back over, and there's a young Knights of Malta lad and myself, and I administered the last rites to this boy, who I think almost died instantly.
January 1972 was a big sort of watershed in politics in Northern Ireland. And because of that and my agitation and our agitation, Stormont was abolished in 1972.
Ladies and gentlemen, Northern Ireland is not a coconut colony.
By now the SDLP had withdrawn from the political process in protest against the continuation of internment.
This particular internment was more difficult than others. We did feel like animals in a cage.
Great respect, you're not giving a direct answer to the question.
Yes.
And the question was that, is it your policy that you will not sit down round a table and talk until every internee is released or charged? Is that the situation?
I am saying that
now?
the Westminster government have accepted 3/4 of our proposals. They have found that they were right and they were valid points to be put forward. They will eventually accept the fourth.
But you are not going to sit round a table until they do?
No, not at the moment, no.
Meanwhile, there was continuing violence on all sides.
The loyalist people are suffering casualties every day of the week. We don't only have bloody Sunday in Belfast and the rest of Ulster. We have bloody Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday and Saturday.
And presiding over it all was, in the absence of the old Northern Ireland Parliament, a new minister in the British government, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, William Whitelaw.
One must never be deterred. You have incidents, I've always said, there will be setbacks and disappointments, but one must never be deterred from what is, after all, the only course for this community in the long run, and that is of a sensible reconciliation.
We were under direct rule under Whitelaw, and in 1972, Stormont was abolished, and a series of conferences were set up. And in 1973 we went to Sunningdale, and we had the Sunningdale conference.
This is the final agreement. It had to be ratified. There will be a formal conference at the next meeting in January.
Gerry Fitt at the apex of his career, Deputy First Minister to Brian Faulkner in a new power-sharing executive. This from his press conference at Sunningdale. And note the themes raised in the final question put to him that day, over 30 years ago.
But this here is adequate enough in our minds to enable us to enter the power-sharing executive. Was there any further questions? No?
Yeah, Gerry, you know, can I add a message to say? I have quoted you, John Hume, Paddy Devlin, Austin Curry and the others all along, every day as saying there were three crunch issues, you know, that you wouldn't cooperate in an executive until in term we had a Council of Ireland and a term was ended and we had a recognition of the RUC. Now, are you now going to take part in an executive while in term is still there?
We are saying...
When there are 600 men in term of long case.
We are saying that there has been considerable progress achieved on all those fronts. And to take any other course, we would believe would have been extremely irresponsible. If the SDLP were to have said, we are not going to take part in a power-sharing exercise until the last internee is released, until the police force is built to traditional lines, that would in fact mean that we would have had absolutely no part to play in creating the new society which we see in Northern Ireland.
It was a moment of hope. The two big blocs in opposition to it, incidentally, were Sinn Féin and the Democratic Unionist Party.
Now, I thought then, and I think now, and I will continue to think, that Sunningdale was by far the most hopeful development that we ever had politically in Northern Ireland since the creation of the Northern Ireland State.
But some 5 months later, after the Ulster Workers' Council strike, Sunningdale collapsed. There followed the Northern Ireland Convention, no solution, the Northern Ireland Assembly, no solution, then the hunger strikes. After the hunger strikes, Gerry Fitt's seat was targeted by Sinn Féin. RTÉ's Northern Ireland correspondent, Jim Dougal, predicted that Fitt would lose because the moderate vote in West Belfast, which had a majority, would be split between Joe Hendren of the SDLP and Gerry Fitt, allowing Gerry Adams to take the seat. 1983.
Since the last election, he's left the SDLP, which he helped to found 13 years ago, because he says that party has lost its socialist idealism and is becoming more concerned about green Irish nationalism. Mr. Fitt's home has been attacked on several occasions. Now, as well as fighting the SDLP, he's up against his old enemy, Sinn Féin. He doesn't differentiate between Sinn Féin and the IRA. He disregards the SDLP's challenge and says his main fight is with Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams, as he told me, outside his heavily fortified home.
Over a number of years, and you will see where we are standing here at the door of my wife and my family, we have been constantly under attack from Republican elements over this past number of years. We've been living in sort of a barricaded fortress here, and it had been very nice to live and to try to bring up a family. And certainly if any significant section of the electorate in Northern Ireland, the Catholic electorate, went to the polls and voted in any significant numbers for Sinn Féin, I think it would paint a very, very dark picture for the future of Ireland. Not only for me, but for everyone else.
Joe Hendren during that campaign.
Over the last 10 years in my political career, I've put their welfare and the social ills of West Belfast number one. I mean, the Divis Flats, the Moyard, I've been doing this for many years. The new people, Sinn Féin, are all of a sudden got this newfound conscience. This is only this last few months, but my goodness, the other day there was a deputation of Sinn Féin led by Gerry Adams about housing in the Beachmount area, and on the exact same day the Provisionals placed a bomb that virtually destroyed 200 houses in the Glen Road. What gross hypocrisy.
I lost the election on the 9th of June 1983, and then I went over to England where I just got a wee flat, and we were over there on the 2nd of July, 3 weeks after the election, and the police rang me up and they said, your house is burning. And geez, I felt very bad about that. So the next morning I flew back to Belfast, and I wouldn't let my wife come with me because my wife was always painting the staircase and putting varnish on the banister. She was very house proud, and I didn't want her to see the state of the house.
He was interviewed at Belfast Airport by Cathal McKillagh.
On the day you lost your West Belfast seat, there was a hint from you that you might stand again. Have you made up your mind yet? Will you stand in another election in Northern Ireland?
I am not sure at the moment. The one thing that I can tell you is the other way around. I have no intention of running away.
So what are your plans now?
I haven't any plans at the moment at all, except to go down to the house and to see what devastation has been caused by yesterday's events.
And I went in and I saw how the house had all been gutted and windows broken. All the furniture, by the way, had been taken out and burned at a bonfire. And just before I left the house, I had a camera with me, and I was taking photographs for my own, photographs of the burned out rooms, etc., with the intention of showing them to my wife at some time. And I looked down on the ground, and I saw it looked like confetti, little bits of paper. And curiosity killed the cat, and I bent down and picked them up. And I can feel that sickening feeling now as I'm sitting telling it to you. I don't think it will ever go away. When I picked up these bits of paper, what was it? It was my wedding photographs. Somebody had stood there and tore them all into little bits, and you can't get them replaced again. And I remember getting a sickening feeling about that. And at that time, by the way, somebody had said to me in a quiet way, would I consider going to the Lords? And my mind, given my background, I was no great admirer of the House of Lords, and still not. But I had said, well, I would think about it, but I had no intention of going. In fact, my wife said to me, no, don't. But when I lifted up those photographs, I felt so incensed and so sick. I said to myself, Jesus, if ever anybody asked me to go to the Lords, I'll go, just to get my own back at these swines who did that.
Those who had burned out his house in West Belfast reserved a special sneer for Gerry Fitt when he accepted a further role in politics by entering the House of Lords. He too was somewhat embarrassed by the pomp and ceremony of his arrival in the Lords, as he admitted to me on a live interview by phone to the Lords the following morning.
Other MPs that I have known over my past 18 years at Westminster, Labour people who have lost their seats have been sent to the Lords. So it's not a totally Tory institution. And they, the Labour men, they were as embarrassed as I was yesterday when they were first introduced into the House of Lords.
So you did find it a bit embarrassing, did you?
I think it did, certainly. I wouldn't hesitate to let the world know that. It's not a terribly elaborate ceremony. A bit amusing, and my 5 daughters were there.
I don't know whether you've seen the Irish Times report this morning.
Someone rang me to tell me what was in the Irish Times, and John, you will know as a journalist that people would say, well, the Irish Times said. Well, it wasn't the Irish Times did say, but it was a particular journalist.
David McKittrick said you seemed only mildly embarrassed as you went through. Let me tell you what he said. As you went through the antiquated, almost Masonic-style ritual of kneeling, hat doffing, and bowing and scraping.
Well, I don't know now what bowing and scraping was. I didn't do any scraping. And the Masonic ritual, I'm not a Mason, nor am I a member of any organisation. I steadfastly again refused to join the Knights of Columbanus. There were many invitations extended to me. So I don't believe in those secret organisations.
Right, Gerry Fitt, Baron Fitt.
Look, my name is Gerry Fitt. Everybody calls me Gerry.
Baron Fitt of Bell's Hill.
That's indeed, yes.
Yeah, Bell's Hill is where your mother is from, is that right?
No, it's not actually. My mother, we were bombed out of a house in Belfast in 1941. I had just gone to sea at the time. I was very young. And my mother and my brothers and sisters, they went away down to this little derelict farmhouse beside Downpatrick. and my mother took to it like a duck to water, and she got hens and goats, and she became the real farmer. And she told me, since she's still living, she's 83 years of age, and she told me that was a very happy period in her life. And then when I got married myself, I didn't have very much money. I don't have very much now. But when I got married in 1947, my wife and I, we went down there and stayed down there for a couple of months on our honeymoon. So for my wife and my mother, two of the most important women in my life, Bells Hill had happy memories. So that's why I took that title, Bells Hill.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
Gerry,
you very much, Tom.
Thanks, good morning.
Have a good night. Bye.
So Gerry Fitt lived out his final years not in Belfast, but in London as a member of the House of Lords. This is how John Quinn's interview with him in the My Education series concluded.
Although I am physically not living in Northern Ireland, I'm never very far away from it. The Irish News, which is a local newspaper in Belfast, in 1989 they published a list of all the people who were killed year by year in all the years of violence. And to see them names so stark there, I have it up on my wall. Every morning I walk into my office, I look at it. And I counted one time that out of the sort of 3,000 people who have been killed, I went to 167 of their funerals, both Protestant and Catholic. So I'm never away from it. I'm always there. And every time I switch on downtown radio or listen to Radio 4 and hear that a Catholic has been murdered because he was a Catholic by the UVF or the UDA, or that a body has been found in Crossmaglen, some people would think that I'm long enough away from it now, 8 years, not to be so closely identified with it or feel about it. If I live to be 100, I'll still be concerned about all that's happening in Northern Ireland.